Coming out is such a hard process that it's no wonder most lesbians and gay men can only manage it once in a lifetime. Coming out begins when we recognize in a stigmatized other something of ourselves, something disturbing we feel we must bring forward. At first, into our own consciousness, then to a community of like minded people where we hope to find welcome, and finally to outsiders. Coming out transmutes what is loathsome or unimaginable into something valuable and nourishing, garbage into gold, sickness into bread. This is an inherently terrifying experience because it means disobeying the voices of social disapproval and often self-hatred as well, to risk becoming a more honest but not necessarily happier or safer or more loved person. Coming out is a normal developmental process of differentiation in the context of our culture's sex-negative pathology. It also encompasses other stages of adult life, which vanilla, gender-congruent, heterosexual people are able to take more for granted. Autonomy from the family of origin, sexual initiation, learning courtship skills and other social skills, relationship formation, consolidation of ties to a friendship network and a community, and sometimes clarification of political, moral, and spiritual values that impel us to take action. Although coming out does not necessarily involve all three stages, coming out to self, subculture, and society at large, the individual who cannot move through the entire process usually is not fully able to separate from the judgments and distorted thinking of the surrounding culture and develop his or her own self-validating, stable identity as a member of a sexual minority. One of the most crucial tasks of coming out is to defeat the shaming voices of self-obliteration and reject the temptation to live for others' gratification and approval rather than our own. By coming out to ourselves, we free up the energy we spent keeping a part of ourselves hidden. By coming out to our kindred spirits, we acquire allies and rewards for integration and openness. We strengthen our little corner of the world, the walled gardens where some of our secrets may be told. By coming out to outsiders, we serve the health of the entire social body. We shut down, or at least contest, the omnipotence of the institutions that foster stigma. We replace ignorance and invisibility with the faces and lives of real people. We widen and clear the path for others to come out as well. None of this is meant to imply that the power to come out lies only with the individual. The dangers that greet sexual nonconformity are quite real and at times life-threatening. There are few situations more painful than needing to come out when it is too unsafe to manage it and survive the process. This is a loneliness like no other. It generates a level of stress that can also be life-threatening. Those of us who have come to any sort of sexual sanctuary, however narrow or beleaguered, must never forget those who are prevented from joining us, and we must never stop trying to extend them practical as well as psychic aid. The work of coming out is rescue work. It is a prayer for the freedom of everyone who cannot escape, political prisoners, hostages to fundamentalism. We cannot complete the last phase of coming out, witnessing to outsiders, unless we are very strong or desperate. If our private lives have been revealed without our consent, we must gather whatever dignity and courage we can scrape together and put the best face on things we can muster. Whether willingly or no, stage 3 of coming out involves service to the body politic. It is at its core an attempt to ease human suffering, and so it has inherent spiritual value. To the extent that the first phase of coming out can be seen as the individual becoming more and more willing to mirror the self as a gift of our Creator, to understand and love the self we were given by that Creator, it too is a spiritual quest. And the attempt to foster kinship, love, and mutual care in the face of hatred and violence is also, I believe, an activity that brings us closer to the divine. Perhaps awareness of this aspect of our lives as queer people, the compassion we must learn to apply to our own wounds and the wounds of others, can help us to resist burnout as activists and breakdown as perpetual outsiders. We do not need to believe in deities or heaven and hell in order to recognize the healing power of bearing witness when evil is done and encouraging the growth of kindness and justice. The notion of heaven is, at any rate, only useful when people ask themselves what they could do to create a heaven on this planet during this lifetime. The notion of God is only helpful when we worry over the problem of what constitutes goodness and attempt to make our best qualities manifest in every mundane interaction with other living creatures. I do not know how many more thousands of years the savior archetype will have to persist in our myths, legends, and catechisms before we realize that the only effective saviors we could possibly have are one another. Cruelty and evil are human problems, not defects of God, and we have it within our own power to banish them. No supernatural intercession is necessary. When people who suffer refuse to do so in silence and instead make a public spectacle of their persecution, it is one more push against the stubborn resistance our species displays towards growing a collective conscience that will no longer tolerate such things as genocide, poverty, and discrimination. By coming out, we establish the edges of a nation that as yet has no territorial boundaries, as cartographers understand such things. Still, those boundaries must be defended, often with our lives. But there is another side of this, our grim combat with those who hate us. There is a powerful temptation to split and view everything bad as associated with the enemy, everything good as within our camp. But that is distorted thinking at best, self-righteousness at worst. We cannot hope to grow as a lesbian and gay community if we punish other people for speaking their sexual truth. Coming out is made more difficult because of the shortcomings of our own community. Some of these defects are not our fault. We may be so marginalized that we have few resources left to comfort one another. But as our resources permit, we are responsible for doing better than our opposition, even if the only victory we want to achieve is on the battlefield of public relations. We tend to avoid these responsibilities because they seem tedious rather than a source of power. Getting into martyr mode encourages a lazy attitude toward our own clutter. Or we can become scavengers, unable to stop attacking, even if we are simply ganging up on someone who is weaker than ourselves rather than storming the Bastille. I think, for activists, the paradigm of the farmer or the mason is much more useful than the paradigm of the warrior.